two, one. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening into the Venomous Fringe. I'm your host, Chris Fringe. In tonight's episode, we got something special, big surprise for a lot of you guys out there. A lot of people had requested for the very much so the longest period of time, and I have to say, it's been long overdue. And I'm very open to exploring everything, researchers left and right, eyewitnesses, and all. Folks, joining me at this time right now, I'm joined by none other than Dark Waters. Dark Waters, welcome to the Venomous Fringe. How are you, sir?
Thank you for having me on, my friend. How are you this evening?
I'm doing very good. I'm hanging in there. The cold by me is intense, but I mean, I'm surviving. How about you?
I'm doing fantastic. It's colder than normal down here for us in New Orleans, so people are having a bit of a conniption fit because we're not used to this kind of cold weather. But overall, things are fantastic, and I'm excited to be on your show and to spend some time with you and your audience.
Absolutely. It's interesting because for the longest time, man, not in a controversial sense, social media could be a huge thing. And I'm one of those guys that's very open to sitting down, talking with researchers and eyewitnesses, and very much so people who've been doing this for quite some time. And to have you on, it's a great thing. It's great to have you on. I heard you on DDoS's show. I heard you on Sasquatch Chronicles and even Coast to Coast AM. So, I mean, for you, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule and coming on.
No, I appreciate it. There's, when you would I do this, so there's no such thing as being busy. Sharing the information and holding those conversations is what I do. So the schedule's not busy. I make time for what's important, and that's what I do. And I just want to thank you for having me on. I thank God for allowing me to experience what I've experienced and gather the information that I have and be able to share it with people. And I know a lot of your audience is familiar with me, but I think we should kind of recap a little bit about me. James Williams, I go by Dark Waters. I created the name Dark Waters based on a number of things. Number one, um, the ability to share stories, the in-depth form of my personality, which really kind of touches on what Dark Waters is. There's nothing surface about me as a person. There's nothing surface about superficial about my life and what I've experienced, from the paranormal to the non-paranormal to the business side of life to just in general. The ups and downs have been fantastical. I'm one of those guys who's lived a life that you can write a book about. And that's what encompasses the Dark Waters. For those of you who don't know, graduated with a degree in electrical engineering, a minor in physics, worked for the Department of Defense, U.S. Space and Strategic Defense Command on Redstone Arsenal. I worked as an engineer for Ericsson Energy of New Orleans, ran multiple companies, still do run multiple companies. 6 years in radio experience, huge private sector experience, contracting here in New Orleans, and then paranormal. On the paranormal side, 100 and I think it's over 160 something interviews. You name it, I've done it. Comic books, comic cons, paranormal panels, recorded for about 4 or 5 TV shows that are coming out, movies in progress. So you name it, I've done it. And I just like the opportunity to share information with people because I think it's important that people know what's going on around them and people know what's going on in the woods.
Absolutely, and I agree with that. And I also think it's important that everybody hears it from a different perspective, from everyone in a variation of discussion, because there's always everything. There's no real explanation to the things that we run into, whether it's cryptids, whether it's paranormal. We can only go by, I think, information in a sense that's been put there, but also too, everyone has different perspectives, and your perspective on a lot of the things cryptid and paranormal is very interesting, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But I mean, for you, where it all started out, um, did you, like, as you mentioned, getting into it, was it also the fact of what you've witnessed in life, what you went through, what you encountered, that was also the prominence of creating the Dark Waters channel and creating the Dark Waters name in terms of this type of practice?
For me, it's a number of things. So specifically to answer the question, I've experienced paranormal things since I was a kid. I grew up in Baptist church in New Orleans and throughout Mississippi. I was the kid in the church that old women would hoover around and hold their hands above and say stuff like, "Oh, this is a powerful kid. You know, he's going to be a strong one. He's got a lot of power." My grandmother was a hoodoo priestess. That side of the family was matriarchal. To this day, if you look at pictures of my deceased grandmother, you will see her surrounded by the family, sitting in a chair. For those of you who don't know anything about hoodoo, hoodoo is matriarchal. It's female oriented, um, and so that's in my blood, along with my Christian background. And then my encounters and experiences as a kid from the 12-foot shadow person that I've shared with everybody. Um, you know, crazy stuff following us in the woods when we were kids. Um, Almost being eaten by alligators. All kind of crazy things have happened to me that kind of led up to this. But the more interesting experiences have been really after I started doing Dark Waters. That's when things really, really started kicking off for me more. Like I had an introduction to what the paranormal is, to what good and evil is as a young man. But you never really get to understand. And Chris, is this something you're going to run across if you keep going down this path? You start to get exposed to what true good and true evil is when you really delve into the paranormal. And then when you get to the heights of the paranormal, where I've gotten to, it starts to expose yourself, both good and evil. And so you have decisions that need to be made, and you have to make choices as to what you're going to share, what you're not going to share, and how you're going to proceed with information. Just recently, I've had confirmation that it's time to really start sharing information on a whole nother level, which is good because you're going to be one of the first interviews where I talk about some of these things that I've never spoken about. I've alluded to a lot, and that goes back to the controversial part that you talked about with social media. My stance for a very long time was, and I've said this publicly, what's the purpose of putting out information when you can be discredited easily? When there's people who have campaigns who campaign to discredit you. And what I've experienced is the talking points that I put out over the past 4 years since 2015. They're initially received as a lie, and people call me a fraud. And then within 12 to 24 months, those talking points are part of the lexicon of what is Dogman. Um, and so, as opposed to taking a standard approach, which I've taken, which is let things kind of roll out over time, I think we're just going to start dropping things that people need to know and putting it out there and putting it on a record. And then eventually it'll come back and it'll circle around. For example, one of the things, Chris, that I've learned and that you probably should use is as you talk to people who have dogman encounters, it's always important to not share everything, because what ends up happening is people start repeating back to you what you put in the public eye. So you describe how a dog man's body is shaped and how their rib cage is shaped and how, for example, how their hip joint is connected. And then next thing you know, that takes on a life of its own. And now it's in creepy pasta stories, it's popping up on interviews everywhere. But you know, it's your talking point that you put out because you're the first person to say it. And I've experienced that over and over and over again. And I wised up to it extremely early and stopped putting out everything. And that's the only way to really vet what's true and what's not true, is to make sure that your information is not coming back to you. And when it does come back to you, um, if you insert little small things into it, then you know that people are taking it and running with it. So if we're talking about Dogman, the number one question is, where does Dogman come from? Um, how did they come to be? Where are they located? What do they eat? What do they do? Why do they show themselves to people and attack some people and don't attack other people? Do they kill people? You know, there's all those questions that are pretty much par for the course questions. And to address where I believe they come from and the information that's been shared with me as to where they come from, there are two paths as to how we receive dogmen. Um, I'll pause right there and I'll go back and come pick that point right back up and say this. Um, some of the things that I'm going to talk about, people are going to need to go back and read, and they're going to need to go back and really study what I'm saying. So if you're listening, take notes, jot it down, and go back and verify for yourself what I'm saying. Two thought processes on it and two beliefs. I believe that number one, there's a certain form of dogman entities that have been with us for an extremely long time. When I say a long time, I mean prior to Noah's Ark and the Great Flood. Those particular types of creatures, some of them talk about Anubis, and they talk about uh, one of the saints which had a dog head. I forgot the saint, Saint George, Saint something. Um, I believe that those entities were around then. Now, whether you believe that they were, um, as people say, a product of fallen angels, corrupting the seeds of everything that God created on the planet, which is what I believe, or whether you believe they were a form of genetic modification, early genetic modification from alien races that visited this planet, there's more than enough evidence to prove that strange creatures existed on this planet prior to the flood, which is why the reason why the planet was flooded. The flood narrative is one narrative of the being a great flood that's recorded across all religions, and pretty much every religious book you can find the flood narrative. So that's one of uh, the the starting points for Dogman. The second one, which is one I'm very familiar with, and I believe to be extremely accurate, is that over the past 60 years to 70 years, there's been a race for genetic data. And what I mean by that is genes, in order to splice and create genetically created beings. If you go back and listen to some of the stories that I put out, in one in particular, a series of stories that started with Alaskan expedition, if you listen to that whole series of stories, if you're a member and you get everything, I go deep into that. We know for a fact now, as time has progressed and the information has come out, that in certain countries there is no law against genetic modification, genetic splicing, and the creation of new beings. Um, the information that's come to me and that's been shared with me through many of sources is that not only have there been dogmen created, but there have been other beings that have been created that are probably would, pale, dogman pales in comparison to them, that just haven't hit the lexicon of what is the paranormal world, because people are not talking about it yet, because they don't know what they see when they see these things in the woods. Dogman has become an extremely popular topic, and I've said over and over there are worse things in the woods than Dogman, and I'm waiting on a few of those things to hit the lexicon before I start talking about them, because I don't want to be first. So you have the pre-flood genetic modifications and manipulations. Then you have post-flood genetic modifications, which are what we're seeing now. And we're seeing these beings on our planet in the woods, and people are encountering them now. So those are the two paths of which these creatures come from.
See, that's the first time I've ever heard about something like that, and that's it gets your mind a few times, especially because I guess of how like you go about when you hear these cases and you hear the reported origin of what it's supposed to be, and I think in a sense it could be very misinforming for those when there's a lot of different beliefs and opinions coming out in the field, and then there's not enough of the data and the discussion of where you can get an idea on what it is. And for dogmen, it's interesting how you make mention about how like there's more important things, there's more dangerous things out there than just dogmen. And I think for dogmen being hyped, and this is something that I've also ran into myself, is it's such a popular topic and it's hot. And when it's hot, it boils and it steams and it becomes something that is totally incredible. But for the same time, it could be also a bit of a curse. Now, I want to ask you this: for the dogman, you make mention there's other dangerous predators out there besides dogmen, but I mean, would you consider the dogman to be a top-notch apex predator, stronger than a lion or a bear, or would you disagree on that?
Well, I would agree that it is a top-notch predator. Um, there's no doubt that it's a top-notch predator. And to circle back as to what you were saying, what you were kind of alluding to is it's hard for people to understand when there's no evidence. But the simple fact of the matter is the evidence is right in front of you. So biblically, there's evidence that talks about genetic modification all throughout the Bible. That's where your faith has to come in. And unfortunately, biblically, the way people are taught the Bible, um, kind of through allegory and not to read it for what it is, they skip over so much stuff. Like, I don't want to go into Genesis 6 and go into a long conversation about those things. But what I will say to you is this: if you go back and you read very, very closely, there are multiple times in the Bible where there were extremely huge beasts that were talked about. Whether you're talking about the Leviathan, whether you're talking about the lion men of Moab, whether you're talking about David and his mighty men, whether you're talking about Nimrod being a mighty man before God and the creatures that surrounded him. So that evidence is there. When we start talking about moving forward into modern day times and modern day evidence, it's all over the place. So you can look up now in China, they have already created, and as you know, when it hits the news, we're talking about stuff that's 10 to 20 years behind. They've already gene edited humans. In China, we already know that they're using cow uteruses and elephant uteruses to create different beings that are being born, and they're called chimeras. We know that this is out there and the evidence is out there. The only thing that it's not pointing to is, and what you're not able to put your finger on is, well, is that being created in the lab, this particular form of Dogman? But what I want people to understand is when you start talking about genetically modifying, splicing, and creating animals, um, not only are they creating dogmen, but they're creating every other thing that you can think of that will be a weapon of war or a weapon of um, or something that can be used to do damage. And I think that's the best way to put it. You can go look it up. You can go research it. You can pull it up. And if need be, when this is over, I'll shoot you every article that you can, so you can post for your audience so they can look at it themselves. So to me, there's no actual mystery in the topic of Dogman. Once you understand everything that's made public, it tells you the story. It's right there in front of you. I think what happens with this particular topic is because it's popular, um, there's this mystery and mysticism to it that and this shine and gleam on it that people are attracted to on a whole nother level. And that's because you have the stories and the interviews and the podcasts and the this and the that. And therefore, it keeps that kind of mystery behind it. But once you really start digging into it, which I've talked to many of people who've actually just listened to what I said and dug into it, it was like, wow, I found out what was going on with that real quick. And they're like, well, what else do you know about? Because it's right there in front of you. And the best place to hide something is in plain sight. And that's what's going on with this particular topic.
I agree with that. I mean, and I will say this. I mean, it kind of sounds like it. For me and for the listeners of my show, follow me for the longest time. I mean, I could see in a very sense where you're coming from, and I know what you're talking about because when we deal, I think with as you said, when doing all these, the amount of information with everything that's been processed, whether it's through eyewitnesses or from podcasts, it can definitely it definitely misinforms. And in the religious value, when you look at the Bible and when the information's there, I've heard cases of when people have talked about, especially in Texas. I hear these cases all the time, and it's not just Texas; it's all over. But as an example, I was dealing with an individual who had dealt with dogman activity on his property, and it was of demonic nature. And this nature was actually to the point where his family was in heavy danger, multiple poltergeist-like activities, and of course, to top it all off, I was doing a live stream, and he had came into the stream, and this creature was outside his window, and there was a lot of provocation. So, I mean, on the belief of them being demons, it definitely it does play a factor. It does, I think, and I think for what the information is stating out there, it's something that I think many would have to take a lot, definitely look more into. And I think that there's no other way to go about it. But I think that's what also makes the perk of a research value at the same time. So, with all of that, in a sense, you're 100% not under the belief that these are a flesh and blood animal roaming the woods of the North Americas and all over the world.
Well, no, not only I'm a belief that there is a flesh and blood animal roaming the woods of North America and the rest of the world. I am also of the belief that there are demonic manifestations of things that impersonate dogmen, um, and manifest themselves in people's lives. So I've spoken to at this point in time about 700 people. That might be a slight exaggerate, maybe 650 people who claim to have had dogman encounters. Out of that, there was a percentage, probably of about 20 to 30%, who've had unexplained things associated with dogman happen to them. So, for example, a young lady in an apartment in downtown New Orleans called me, and she had an encounter with a wolf inside of her bedroom as tall as the ceiling with glowing red eyes. Same description as Dogman. She described Dogman to the T. It was uncanny how she described the muscle structure, the legs, the hocks, the long arms and claws. But it was in her bedroom in the middle of the city. No way possible for that to be there, right? Um, so I do believe that there is a spiritual component to it. And just to circle back as to what you were talking about, because I don't know if it was breaking up and I missed some of the things you were saying. Um, that spiritual component, where it's this negative entity that's inside of people's houses, invading their space. Every time that those people have had those encounters, with the exception of two people, they called on the name Jesus Christ and it left. That's what led me to the understanding that there is something demonic that manifests and pretends to be Dogman. And for people who've had these encounters in the woods on their property, and when I speak to them, their dogman encounter is different than someone who has a flesh and blood dogman encounter. It's completely different. There are things that are happening inside of their house associated with their encounter, as opposed to people who have the flesh and blood encounters where all the activity is outside of their house, and their encounter pretty much stops at their door, with the thing messing with their doorknob, messing with their light bulbs, moving their camera, doing things of that nature. That's when I consider it to be something flesh and blood. But when you're seeing Dogman, but then you're hearing noises in the house and things are falling over and moving, that's something completely different. It's one of the things that we don't talk about in the Dogman. Well, it's one of the things that I don't hear people really talk about when it comes to Dogman, is those negative entities that impersonate Dogman. But also at the same time, one of the things that's been a common thread amongst all those people who were having that activity is that those were the people who were going to sleep listening to different Dogman interviews and Dogman stories. And like I've told them, and I've said this before, people say, "Oh, Dark Waters, I listen to you to go to sleep." And I've been somebody who said for a long time, don't do that, because you're feeding this into your subconscious mind. And I believe what happens to those people is that these entities are tapping into their subconscious sphere and manifesting itself as what frightens them the most and what scares them the most and gets the rise out of them the most. So to be clear, I believe not only are there flesh and blood, now those were the two places that I described where I believe they started from and how we got to this point today, but also I believe there's a spiritual aspect of it, that this is that there are demonic manifestations of it. Now, to tie everything together, at the same time, I've spoken to hunters in the woods who had flesh and blood dogman encounters, who saw them through their scope, or had walked into an area where they said the area went quiet and they were extremely afraid, and they actually saw this dogman walk out from behind a tree, and they started praying, and it turned and walked away. It didn't run, but it turned and left the area. So there's a lot that's not really discussed when it comes to Dogman, and I'm glad we're getting able to kind of peel back a couple of layers on this and get into it.
For sure, and I would definitely love to talk a little bit about it because you mentioned these negative entities. Are these entities, would you say, would be spiritual in a sense of them being almost like in a way paranormal? I mean, maybe I went the way I had heard about it or how it goes about. I just want to be sure it's in the right category, or would you say that this is more of a skinwalker ordeal?
No, I would say we're talking about a spiritual entity. And what I mean by spiritual entity, um, there are, and I alluded to this on my Facebook page, and I'll go into this. So one of the things that I think we need to understand as a whole when we start talking about spiritual elements is we need to talk about the various dimensions of spiritual dimensions that are right here amongst us. So we know scientifically it's been proven that there's, if I'm not mistaken, a total of 11, 12 different dimensions that exist. If you go back to the Bible and you go back and read the description of heaven and the different levels of heaven and where it is and the firmament and where hell is located, it even lays out different dimensions. And so when we start talking about entities that are coming from lower dimensions, demonic entities that are coming from lower dimensions, then we're talking about the same thing as these manifestations of Dogman. Sometimes people have encounters with these negative entities, and sometimes they manifest as shadow men. People in hoodoo and voodoo will tell you that shadow men are great and they're cool, but the people who encounter shadow men will tell you no, they're not cool. Sometimes they manifest themselves as things like the oil man that I've done stories about. Sometimes they manifest themselves as simply a mini shadow that's in their house. But it's all about what it has the power to manifest itself and show itself to be. When you start talking about skinwalkers, which are people who are a part of what I would call some of the oldest, most powerful magical rituals on the planet, and they're not only skinwalkers in the Native American lores and religions, but it's in African witch doctor tribes, and it's all over the world. They're not called the same thing. You're talking about something else, someone who's went through some of the most depraved and worst rituals on the planet to obtain supernatural powers in which they can manifest whatever the hell they want to manifest. So now we're getting into three different separate things. As you know, and I'm pretty sure you're aware of, that there are rituals that you can do that will empower you. Whether it's people who use the lesser keys of Solomon, whether it's people who practice the Luciferian arts and worship Lucifer, there are rituals that you can do, just like there's rituals of God that you can do to give you the strongest hedge of protection. Some of those that I've been through myself. There are dark side of rituals that you can do that will allow you to tap into a source of power, or the source of power, because God is the ultimate source. He created everything. And then there's other things that he created that have power, that he granted power to, that people can tap into, that allow them to do all kind of magical and manifest all kind of things. So we're talking about three completely different things. I'm in agreement with each and every one of them. They all have their place when you start talking about Dogman, and they all have their place when you start talking about the paranormal. So if you are imagining a whiteboard in front of you right now, you can slap up there Flesh and Blood Dogman. You can slap up there the demonic manifestations of Dogman and of Bigfoot, and you can slap up there your skinwalkers, which are people who have obtained the power by going through some of the most grotesque rituals that I've ever heard of, which include eating their own flesh, stuff that's just ridiculous that they have to do to get there.
It's very intense the way when you hear about it, because when you hear it, when you take it at first glance, especially your mind, and for those who are listening in right now, I mean, it takes a lot to handle. But I've heard about that when you inverse with some sort of rituals and whatnot, and it's a seance. You know, you bring in these negative energies, and this entity energy, it all flows in. It's something that I think for a lot of people out there, I would personally not ever recommend, not unless you have a death wish. But I will say this: I mean, in terms of what it is, I also think this goes back to the whole idea about being misled. I think that when it comes to research, when you come about it, when you're talking with especially dogmen, it's like, and it's just in general with any cryptid, you got to like get a blueprint, you got to put out things left and right, and to put all this information out. But I want to ask you this, and maybe if I've asked this to you also, in an elaboration portion, I mean, why do you feel that there's not enough? Why do you feel, in a sense, like for people not necessarily understanding this? Do you think it's because it's a lot to take in, or do you just think because there's so many other beliefs out there that it just it gets contradicted, and it just throws into one direction, and it becomes immediate confusion, or do you think it's also because no one would want to believe that's the truth about these creatures?
You referring to Dogman? Are you what are you
I'm referring to Dogman, but also at the same time cryptids in general. Like, I mean, do you like, well? But in terms of Dogman, like what we're saying, what you're saying in general about the Dogman and the whole demon side of it. Do you feel though, and that's why I said, if maybe if I asked it, or maybe I didn't hear it like when you went about it, Why would you think, in a sense, there's not enough people believing that belief? Do you think it's because it's something that another belief that they get contradicted on, they don't think
I got
of,
you.
you know?
I got you. So the the reason why I say that is because Dogman has been the topic itself is only become popular, I would say, probably over the past, really become popular over the past 4.5 years. And so what's been driving the narrative is what people are putting out. And so 90% of your creepy pastas that are out there are based on what people have heard from other quote unquote eyewitnesses, and then it's a spinoff of that, right? So it's like you planted an apple tree and then all it grows is apples, right? Well, in order to accurately reflect what goes on with Dogman, you need a tree that grows apples, pears, and oranges. But right now, all we have is an apple tree. And so everyone is going to the apple tree, eating that apple, but they're not really paying attention to everything else that goes on because nobody really talks about it. And it has to get into the lexicon of Dogman, um, what else is out there as it pertains to in order for it to catch on and for people to come forward and really talk about it. That's one of the things that I've discovered about being in this is that someone has to kind of kick a door in on some of the topics. And then once that door's kicked in, then people start feeling more comfortable to really talk about it. The reason why I've had the advantage over others in getting more information is, number one, because my format is not an interview format. My format is a story format. And what it does for me and what it does for the people who contact me is they don't have to worry about being judged based on what they tell me. I'm the one that's always judged. So I'm the one that takes the hits and the arrows and the slings and the bows for them, which is why the people who share their stories with me, they're like, nah, I love this guy because he shared my story and I listened to what everybody said. And man, they were acting crazy, blah, 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 blah. But they know there's that layer of protection, which is me. So I take the hits. But what that does, it allows people to literally tell you everything. And don't get me wrong, there's an element of people in the Dogman community that have pure mental illness. So I'll get those phone calls. I mean, purely crazy phone calls. Oh, I saw a dog man jump over my fence with a 10-foot long machete with a red feather on it, and he had a hat on. Or, oh, I saw a dog man in my backyard talking on a cell phone. You got to go through all that, which that stuff just makes absolutely no sense. You got to take all those phone calls in order to get to the other phone calls, which are people who are having those dogman demonic encounters. And then you get to the people who've actually done the rituals. And this is something nobody's ever probably talked about. So there have been people that I've spoken to who've done rituals to summon demons. And throughout these rituals, which tend to be 15 to 30-day rituals where you don't get a chance to take a bath, you don't get a chance to pretty much do anything. You sit in one spot for 12 hours a day, you get 12 hours of rest. Within those 12 hours, you're isolated inside of a circle because for protection. Well, as they go through those processes, different things manifest around them. Sometimes it's shadow people. Sometimes it's gigantic snakes. As they go closer and closer through these rituals, but to summon the darker angels, I'm sorry, let me be clear. To summon the darker angels, the fallen angels, as they go through these rituals, pause right there. This is where a lot of people that are skinwalkers get their power, which that's going to be a problem. But hey, some people might catch feelings about it. I got God in my corner. As they go through those rituals to get this power and manifest and have these angels manifest themselves, in order for them to get granted the power that they want, there are a number of things that manifest around them inside of that circle. Dogmen. There have been people who describe to me smaller versions of Bigfoots. There have been people who describe to me gray aliens manifesting. All these things manifesting as they go through these rituals. And we're talking about very dark, deep occult things that the average person won't tell you because they don't know. And the average person in the Dogman community won't say because they don't know. They don't talk to these people. You're talking about very dark and deep things that happen. So when you tie that together with the spiritual aspects of what I'm talking about, bringing up things from lower dimensions, then you come to realize that, hold on, there are things in lower dimensions that mimic and possibly are these creatures. And so that's really jumping off the diving board into the deep end when you start talking about the spiritual aspects of it and the demonic aspect of it. But it needs to be put out there. And I think that because nobody's going into it and nobody's made that connection, and nobody's put it out there in the lexicon, you haven't heard about it. I'm pretty sure people will come forward with it eventually in time. But as of right now, the Dogman lexicon, the Dogman talking points is I saw something in the woods and it left and went the other way. Or I saw something in the woods and it attacked my house and attacked my property. I tried to shoot it. I saw something while I was driving down the road and it crossed the road in front of me, right? That is what the majority of your Dogman encounters are at this point in time. And some of that is what I like to call mimicry and manifest, like people just mimicking other encounters. Some of it is clout chasing. It's a whole bunch that goes into how we got to the point where we are today, that that gets everything out into the talking points of the Dogman community, and that's where we are. But when you start talking about it as a whole, there are way more elements and aspects of it than that are not discussed, and I know they're not discussed.
And of course, because as a podcast, and more importantly, not just for the on the research end of it, but on my end, I'm open for you to discuss a lot of that, because I think for the nature of it, to get an idea, because I'm also a firm believer, I'm also a firm listener too. And I think that for the hearing of that would be very beneficial for those who aren't very familiar with it. Now, would you be open in going into a little bit about it? I mean, besides what you had said, I mean, unless there's something maybe you did go into a little bit about it, and maybe I'm just missing it. But I mean, in terms of the whole open wide, the bare bones of it, how much, in a sense, do you think for us as listeners and as people who are out there trying to get an idea on Dogman, how much do you think, out of a chunk percentage wise of what we're of the research aspect of it, do you think we've gotten to in this? Do you think it's like a 40%? Do you think it's a 60%, an 80? And I ask this because I would like to hear a few of the things, the beliefs of what you have with it, especially because you're also, from what is known, you've talked a lot of topics and a lot of hot spots, particularly Taylor, Mississippi being one.
Mm-hmm.
And for the nature of what what you want to bring out, and that's the whole concept. What are some other things, aspects about Dogman people don't quite understand?
No, that was the most significant aspect of Dogman that people don't understand. Um, and I just really jumped. That was a deep dive into it. I mean, to get any deeper, I would literally need to have one of the high witches come on and go deeper into the rituals and things of that nature that they use. But we can. There's still more things we can talk about, and I get where you're going. So, and I follow. I follow where you're going. So, specifically to answer your question, and when you start talking about Dogman, the topic as a whole, I think the number one thing that we need to understand is that probably 65% of the stuff that you're hearing out there is not true. It's made up, it's clout chasing, it's BS, right? The rest of it is probably half truths to partial truth, or the majority of the rest of it is half truth to partial truth, and then you get to the real truth. There's a reason why 100% truth is very difficult to put out in a podcast format and in various different formats. And that's because of the consequences and repercussions of what happens when people actually go into sharing true Dogman encounters. The problem that the true Dogman encounter people run into, I put this out, I think I talked about this on Coast to Coast AM when I first got into it with Dave Schrader. I started talking about the consequences. The way you can tell, Chris, if the encounter is 100% real, it's not just what they tell you from the beginning to the lead up to the encounter. You have to stick with that individual until the encounter is over. Like, you have to stick with them after the activity stopped and find out what happens to them next. And unfortunately, right now, the presentations that we get across the board are, "Ooh, I saw something in the woods," or "something spooky," blah, 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 blah. And then that's the end of it. Well, what happens afterwards? And this is the most significant part. my very first thing that happened to me after I really started getting the Dogman and I visited Taylor, Mississippi, was I got a knock on my door. And I've talked about this over and over and freaking over again. And not necessarily a knock on my door. That's not 100% accurate. It was a knock on the door after someone sat outside of my house for a week and waited for me to approach them, and then told me, hey, man, I love your stories. I like what you talk about Dogman, but you should be careful about the locations that you share with people. Okay. And I'm like, well, why? Well, because you're sharing information that could cause a major problem and get people hurt. Then from there, went to a knock on my door. Hey, man, I listened to your story. That was great, man. I want to talk to you about some of the things that you don't know about Dogman. And I've spoken to this and spoken on this over and over. This happened to me after I went to Coast AM, one of the biggest talk radio shows on the planet, and drew a whole bunch of attention to my ability to share the content and share the stories. And during that conversation, sitting on my porch on 2706 Robert Street, I was told that, hey, man, you have a unique skill and gift and an ability to communicate, which can be powerful and can be dangerous if you use it the wrong way. And I'm like, wow, okay, that's such a veiled threat that it's ridiculous. And I said, listen, here's where I stand. I want to put the truth out to people. I'm not willing to die over it. You know what I'm saying? That it's not worth it. And that's where the talking points of what happens to you after you get too far into it came from. And if you go back, and I don't delete anything, especially on my Facebook page, if you go back, that's when you started hearing me talking about, hey, man, people get tax audits. How do I know? Because guess who got a freaking tax audit? I started talking to people about knocks on the doors. How the hell do I know? Because guess who got the knock on their door? And it goes beyond that, because people that I've spoken to have had Dogman encounters who had evidence, have had the evidence actively taken from them. I mean, I've talked to multiple people who've had it actively taken from them, whether it be from a computer crashing and things happening on a computer that are impossible to happen, going through those computers, going to different people to have a take a look at them. People like, yo, what happened to your computer ain't supposed to happen. Whether it be someone knocking on your back door, not your front door, being in your backyard, taking the evidence, telling you, give it to me, and you won't have a problem. One gentleman was actually pulled over by the police and held on the side of the road and questioned about the evidence. So there are consequences to those. That's why I always tell people, or for the longest, I told people, hey, man, I'm looking out for you. You don't want to go where these Dogman locations are because it's bad, Then it got to the point where people harassed me so much. I was like, look, okay, here you go there. That's, the last several Dogman stories. I'm like, look, this is exactly where it is. If you're crazy enough to go. And then we had people start going, and they would get halfway into the area where it was and be like, yo, the woods went quiet. I left. Yeah, the woods went quiet because you thought I was lying to you. So in order to understand the true Dogman encounters, you have to have the whole story. And it doesn't take place just in that one day, one incident, one time frame. One of the ones that I held on for a very long time, I didn't let this gentleman tell his story for years, was Connor. He had a Dogman encounter, and it's on my channel now. And he had one of the most epic Dogman encounters out there ever. He saw a little smaller version of a Dogman, which looked like a fox. It was beating on the side of his van, trying to get him to come outside. When he looks through the window, he sees this little thing crawling around the side of his van. It stands up next to a tree, and he looks out into the woods beyond it, and he can see the two biggest, hugest pair of eyes that he's ever seen. There was other things that happened on that property after his Dogman encounter, where he got visits that actually terrified him from human beings that behaved in ways that no normal human being would behave, and things that happen. You can go listen to it if you want to. And I don't want to go super deep. I guess I could go super deep into it. It's there for you to listen to it. You don't need for me to worry about it. But we're talking about red light scanning his property, people running around on his property, him pulling weapons on men, and they were not afraid, didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't twitch a muscle. So when you start talking about Dogman stories, Dogman encounters, things that are happening to people with Dogman, in order to get to the true essence of what really happened, you have to have the entire picture from start to the real finish, not just the finish of, oh, it's gone, or, oh, my cousin shot it. No, what happened after your cousin shot it? You know what I'm saying? One of the guys that I talked to just recently, had a Dogman encounter, shot Dogman. I said, hey, man, What happened after you shot it? It ran off into the woods. I'm like, all right, were you close to your property? He says, yeah. I said, that's not over. You need to get your stuff together and keep your weapons locked and loaded. He's like, well, why? Because it's an animal. Nah, bro, it's not the same kind of animal you used to. That thing is coming back. A week later, came back. A week later, gave him hell. He calls me, hey, man, what do? I said, I told you shouldn't have shot it in the first place. Only thing I can tell you to do is go on about your business and move, bro. I said, because I don't really think there's going to be anything you can do to get this thing to stop terrorizing you, stop beating on the side of your house, stop harassing your dog, stop doing the things that it's doing because you inflicted an injury to it. So there's always the back end consequences. And that's how you really, really know what a true Dogman encounter has been had. You have to hear everything. I mean, you literally have to hear everything.
I agree 100%. I mean, I've gotten a few reports of people who've told me the most craziest things, whether they've had rocks thrown at their windows or they had one of them try to break into the house and try something. There's always different variations and ways to go about it, but I always believe in a sense, and I agree, the story and its tack of being true, everything left and right, not just the bitty bits and details, everything that puts out there. And I always keep updates with eyewitnesses out there, especially whom have had these encounters. And some of these people I've spoken to overseas, some of these people I've spoken to in my backyard, literally. And it's the idea that I think if there's enough of everything where you can get all the information, all the source out there, that's the most important thing. But also to the full details, the full story. Everybody wants to know, but wants to know properly. And I also, and I don't want to go into just switch gears, but this was something I wanted to ask you even in the beginning in reference to Dogman was this is a big question, not just for me, but also from the community as well. Everybody always asks about this. And I think it's become so complex because of the information around it. But in your opinion, I mean, missing 411, are there cases, in your opinion, do you believe that some of these cases, or maybe a few of these cases, are related to the Dogman phenomena?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm pretty sure there are a number of those cases related to Dogman phenomena. I'm pretty sure there are a number of those cases that are related to things that aren't Dogman that are out in the woods that are stalking and hunting humans. But you can definitely, check that box that some of that's related to Dogman phenomenon. But when you start talking about missing people in the woods and cryptids in the woods, you really have to go back to what we were talking about, genetically modified creatures and weapons of war. And from there, you really, really have to go into understanding government-sponsored entities and dark research and how money has been poured into genetic research and look at where these phenomenons and these people are coming up missing. So if I'm not mistaken, majority of people missing 411 are going missing on state parks and things of that nature. And then you need to correlate how far some of these government-sponsored entity labs are from those locations. Now, it's a little bit harder to find, but if you research some of them, you really, really look, you'll notice that some of those, well, not some, a lot of those are located in close proximity to those exact same areas. And I'll leave that at that. Some things are better for you to research and better for me not to say, but I will tell you, yes, 100% yes. And I'll just give you the trail as to go look for what to find, and you'll find what I'm talking about.
When it comes to not just the Dogman phenomena, we're talking also now Bigfoots and other cryptids out there. Much like the Dogman phenomena, is Bigfoot in the same way of belief of what you said about Dogmen in terms of origin, in terms of the understanding? Same thing. Is that the same junction, or is that also a different cryptid on its own fashion, which it is, but in terms of origin and the belief system behind it?
I believe all of them I believe every last one of them follow those same three paths that I've explained to you. Every last one of them follow those paths. And when you start talking about Bigfoot specifically, when you start talking about northern, like Alaska and areas of that nature, in the encounters that people have there, you find much larger creatures there. As you come down further south, you find more smaller, more aggressive creatures down here. But I believe that same path is what's been followed for not only the Bigfoot, the Dogman, for the giants that people have described to me that they've seen in the woods, the little people that people are seeing in California, um, the lizard man, which people have seen in state line Mississippi and in Florida. It's all the same path, and it all comes from those same origins, all the way down to the lineman, which I've done an extensive study on and stories on. It's all the same. It's all the same origin points. It's just a matter of what people are seeing and what locations they're in or they're living in that dictates what they see. And one of the advantages I have is because of story format, I get stories from all over the world. I don't take stories by email. I force people to call me and tell me what they have to say, but we can go all the way to freaking the Philippines, where I've spoken to people in the Philippines that are actually Filipino mafia bosses that have had Bigfoot encounters in the Philippines. And I mean mob bosses that I know through other associations here in New Orleans that have had Bigfoot encounters in the Philippines. But it's still consistently the same creature. And it looks the same. It's a little bit bigger there, but it looks exactly the same. And the only way to explain that is that these things have had to have a start, and they all have to have some kind of common thread. And that's what I believe to be the common thread. So I think you can stick all those on the board when it comes to Bigfoot. Stick the same thing on the board when it comes to Lizard Man. When you start getting into cryptids, you should be able to stick everything on the exact same board because it all falls in line. When you start talking about spiritual manifestations of things, now you get into a little bit different thing. But when you start talking about Bigfoot, Dogman, Lizard Man, even this freaking thing in the woods that's with the triangle head that people have seen Dogman chasing after, literally, they all fall into the same category.
I agree. I think and I think for those out there who are listening in, will also get that idea too. Especially, I mean, with each, I think with each deliverance, it's also something that we, as researchers, narrators, or whatever, go upon and just have to present and get the ideas of. It's all about the research data itself. It's like learning how to drive a car for the first time. You got to do it yourself. You got to go out there and actually get an idea on this stuff. Um, with all things cryptid wise, have you yourself have any collected? I mean, you most likely have, but in terms of anything recently that you haven't shared, any new encounters cryptid wise, or anything, whether Bigfoot, Dogman, or just in general, cryptid encounters that you have or plan on sharing down the road? Be exact.
I'm getting ready to go into something that I think is a little bit dangerous for me, and I've been trying to figure out how to put it out. And I haven't completely figured out how I'm going to do this. So let's circle back and jump down the rabbit hole real quick. So picking up where I left off on Dogman encounters and the actual aftermath, which we'll call it aftermath of an encounter. Picking up where I left off on that, you come to find out that there are two different factions of people who approach Dogman witnesses, the ones who are real witnesses who have real evidence and stuff that can be dangerous, stuff that can get out into the public knowledge to a point to where it could really kind of wake people up. And there's one group of guys that I've encountered that not really that friendly, not really that nice at all. And then there's another group that I've encountered that I would really consider to be patriots. Like these guys are outstanding men. They are really out for the truth, and they want people to understand things, but they understand the ramifications of mass groups of people coming to the single conclusion that the woods aren't safe, right? When you start touching on that, you get to the point where the story that I'm going to release comes from one of those good groups of people, and it goes into some of the uses of Dogman domestically and how they're being used, internationally, how they've been used. And when I say earlier, I alluded to weapons of war and how they've been used, and their unique abilities to track other entities that are much more faster than a human being could ever track. Um, Circling back to what I said about my friend Connor, when he first had his encounter with people on his property, both of us were confused about, well, who these people were. Like, I mean, he was confused, I was confused, like, what the hell is this? What are they doing on your property? And then it turns out that as information started coming to me about retrieval teams and teams that would actually go out and retrieve these creatures when they were being used to hunt down other things, that's what those guys were. So I think that what's coming down the pipeline, I'm still trying to figure out how to do it safely, and how to not really screw this up. I think the biggest thing is, and what'll surprise people, is Dogman's use from a GSE perspective. What I mean by government sponsored entities perspective, and what they're used for from a technology standpoint, which opens another door into other cryptids that I don't think people have ever heard of. Well, I know people have never heard of, because it's just not a part of the lexicon, because I had never heard of these things prior to these conversations. So yeah, I got something coming down the pipeline that that I'm working on now, but it's one of those things where you have to do it the right way. It has to be done the right way in order for my protection. It needs to be done the right way, and that's really where some of the worst encounters, unfortunately, are trapped inside of my head, and I don't share them because I'm just not comfortable sharing them. Like, I put out a story just recently about Willie Pitford was that Willie Pitford? And how he went hunting for Bigfoot and discovered that he was actually going onto a property where it wasn't Bigfoot that was being hunted, it was humans that were being hunted. I got a little pushback when I did that one. It wasn't public pushback, but it definitely was some pushback because it went into some of the things that are going on in the woods that nobody else talks about. And so when it comes to covering some of these topics, I just have to be careful. So yeah, there are some things out there that I'm going to get into recently. Nothing that I really want to get into now, because I really want to make sure I do it the right way. And I think I've said about enough to where people have an understanding there's more out there. There's a hell of a lot more out there. And just specifically to talk about Dogman, like if you go back and you look at Linda Godfrey, she had which by the way, Linda's my girl. I love her. She's such a sweetheart. She had a story that came out a couple of years ago about a metallic Dogman that someone encountered with red eyes. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but she was the one to break that, and she only put it out and she went quiet on it. I understand why she put it out and she didn't say anything else. She typed it on a blog, the metallic Dogman, and that was it. If you go back and look, it wasn't a whole bunch about it. But there are things that people discuss and people don't discuss, and the smart researchers know that there's a line that you don't cross it. If you're going to be kind of a habitual line crosser like me, you know how to put half your foot across the line and say what needs to be said, then pull it back, because there's consequences for it. So yeah, I'll get into some things, but nothing that I really want to get into right now.
Fair enough, and I understand 100%. You always want to make yourself protected. You always got to make sure that you don't want to cross any borders in terms of whatever. In terms also, in response, this is something that I've also heard multiple times with various people. So I 100% I respect that, and also too I have to agree with Linda Godfrey. I've always been a big fan of her work. Um, Also, I think since Dogman we've talked about like crazy, like clockwork. Um, you mentioned, and I don't know if you'd be able to open about, as you made mention just now about the whole, all these entities, people may know about. I'm curious to know about this creature, though, that you made mention that apparently is seen in Dogman cases, this triangle-shaped creature. Now, maybe it's just me, and perhaps maybe for some people out there who aren't familiar, what is it exactly? Is it a paranormal entity? Is it something of another cryptid? I mean, I'm curious because this is the first I'm hearing about it. I hate to say it in a sense, but I mean, I've never heard of this before, this triangle-shaped creature.
Well, that's circling back into what I said. I didn't really want to get too much into.
Not a problem. Not a problem.
What I will say is this. One of the things that I wanted to discuss with you was kind of the censorship. And I think people should be prepared for it. and I think we should touch on this. So 2 years ago, 2017, I started my own website, specifically because two of the engineers that I graduated school with from Southern University went into Google, one into YouTube, one into Google, and I got a heads up about what censorship was coming. And I met the profile for what was coming down the pipeline. But also they gave me some deep insights into some of the things that are going on. And unfortunately, I try to warn people, but they don't listen. So a lot of the infighting that happens in the Dogman community, the mass flagging, the drama, the bull crap that goes back and forth, it hits a radar inside of different organizations. And so if you go back and you look across the board, there was shadow banning that happened with a lot of the cryptid channels. There was demonetization that hit a boatload of channels. And then there were some channels that just got popped. Some channels just got bust across the head and went away. Well, some of that stuff we brought on ourselves with all the drama and dumb crap. You know what I'm saying? Because you put yourself on a radar with the stupidity, right? I believe that everything in life is competitive. And anytime there's money on the table where money can be made, there's going to be intense competition. Unfortunately, that intense competition in that community didn't manifest itself by people putting out better products. They manifested themselves by people doing mass flagging campaigns, backbiting, saying this about that person doing this, going over to other people's channels, flagging. Well, you notice that recently YouTube rolled out where they were reviewing comments that people were making on YouTube channels, right? And they were actually holding comments accountable. And so what you saw was the behavior, which spanned all channels because people would act crazy. It started putting holes in the boats of all the ships because people were behaving. Now, when they rolled out their changes, when they talk about, oh, well, we'll be looking at comments and what people are saying in the comment sections, they had already been doing it before they rolled it out. They had been doing it 12 months before they rolled that out. And so when you start seeing the demonetization, when you started seeing the shadow banning, which is not necessarily your audience is not getting your information, but in turn, your audience not getting your information, not getting your notifications led to revenues dropping, right? When you saw that, they had already made that decision to do that. Now, inside of that organization, there were genres lined up. This genre, makeup, this genre, Bigfoot, this genre, paranormal, this genre, ghost, this genre, video games, this genre. And so there was these different genres of content that are lined up that people were looking at. They were looking at it from monetization standpoint, how much money is coming in the door, how much revenue is being created, what was happening. And then you had problem genres where it was like, okay, this is all these mass flaggings, which cause manual reviews. Because anytime someone does a mass flagging campaign and they start hitting we're going to flag you, we're going to, this, it goes to a manual review. All that manual review stuff started coming out inside of creators. And you'll understand this because you see it inside your console of your creator, your studio, right? You'll see where a video is demonetized, is yellow, and it needs to be manually reviewed. Well, all that stuff was already in place. What we did in our community was put ourselves pretty much damn near at the top of the list of people to be looked at because of the behavior. And so what we experienced from censorship was just the genetic form, which was across the board, which was pretty much a little bit of tuning back and shadow banning because they wanted to move towards something that was a more profit-oriented revenue model, which I completely disagree with, because if McDonald's doesn't want to advertise on my content, then guess what? Go find somebody who does want to advertise on my content. Don't tell me I have to change because McDonald's doesn't like it. Find somebody who will, right? But then there's the other element where the behavior actually forced everything to take a dip and it took a dive. And so now what you're seeing now is the results of a lot of the behavior. And if you go back and you go find other communities where the behavior was similar, you'll see the exact same thing. A lot of the Wiccan and witch channels experienced the same thing. Some of the ASMR channels experienced the same thing because the ones that had the most drama and the most BS really took a hit. So when we start talking about demonetization, censorship, part of it is organic, um, meaning we created it ourselves. Another part of it is generic. It's a corporate decision based on it hit everybody across the board. But the organic aspect of it is what we did to each other. So, Chris, now, I mean, now is the time to actually have a podcast, because you'll look and you'll see where YouTube channels are stuck at a certain number. Now, some channels are growing, but a lot of those channels are buying subscribers, right? And if you go back and do channel audits, you'll see where, okay, it says somebody has 60,000 subscribers, but it's really 40,000 real subscribers, right? But you'll notice that there were channels that are just like literally frozen in place. They'll grow by 500 a month, or they might grow by 200 a month, or some of them will grow a little bit here and a little bit there. But as a whole, the community has to get a hold of what I like to call the crazies, who create fake accounts and do all the bull crap, because it's hurting the Dogman topic as a whole. Like I'm beyond just Dogman, so, and I've expanded beyond YouTube. So me as a person, like, I pulled myself out of that because I had forewarning what was coming and prepared a place for me and the Dark Waters family. But for those people who are still on YouTube who really want great content, you guys are gonna have to change the way some of the behaviors are happening, because it's only destroying what you love. And that's really when you start getting down to censorship and demonetization. That's exactly where what it boils down to. And that's what's going on. A lot of people say, well, the YouTube changes algorithm and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, but it's a person that goes in and reprograms the algorithm based on what the person's seeing. And we talk about algorithms like it's AI computers. No, the algorithm is only a person sitting behind a desk at a computer saying, okay, we're going to implement this change and this change. And then the program takes out and goes and fulfills that order. And unfortunately, in this community, Dogman specifically, that behavior has led to a lot of bad things. I mean, a whole lot, and probably a hell of a lot more coming down the pipeline. And you see where you don't have as many content creators that touch on a topic, like real researchers that touch on a topic. You got tons of creepypasta guys who sit and write phenomenal stories. Those guys are creative beyond, creative. Most of those guys should be like award-winning authors for the content that they can write, or the content that they're getting from people who submit it online, which, like, oh, I had this Dogman account, they just told a story. But when you start getting into researchers, which are the people who really make a difference, that's where the problem really lies. You know what I'm saying? So that's one of the things that needs to be discussed. It needs to be out in the open for people to understand what's happening and what's going on. If it doesn't change, and I only can tell you, it's just going to get worse. It's going to get a hell of a lot worse.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, the interesting thing about this, and I know a lot of you guys in the chat right now are kind of, you're looking at it and you're wondering, well, I mean, how does that make sense, or what, what does that have to do with this? Well, it's the whole concept, because it's not just, for me, I've had that happen to me. I mean, personally, we're told the algorithm, and then when you hear stuff like this, it kind of makes a lot of sense. When you start adding fuel to the fire, it ignites, and of course, it becomes a firestorm, and then things just explode from left, right, in each direction. And unfortunately, these are the things that happen. And I mean, a lot of people often ask, well, how come I don't know I didn't know you uploaded. I didn't know I didn't get a notification. And then when you hear stuff like that, you hear the drama, you hear the tension, and there's a lot of it that it boils. And the water itself will boil up, and it'll just create an entirety of problems. But I think it's important that we touch base on this type of stuff, because at the end of the day, if everyone's being misinformed about the real answer behind it, you don't have an idea, not just because an answer's not out there, but also too because you just hear a lot about it. But it's intense how censorship, in a sense, how this is going about, because I mean, this is no different than how major networks have to put around their content, have to put around how there's a thing that they have to go by in a way. It's like censors almost, you know. And when people who are, of course, monetized, they, you know, you can't say certain words, or more importantly, you know, in terms of being a monetized channel, you cannot have anything that's copyright. And unfortunately, it happens to a lot of people. And, you know, I think that this is a topic of that, especially, that is to be discussed. Especially, too, you know, not just that, but I mean, I've too have began to branch out content wise, not just on another video platform, but also podcast in general, because of just how intense the situation is. And I've seen YouTube now as years go on, and you know, even beginning in 2017, in that margin when you would have found out about that, you know, for me, everyone's doing YouTube now, and it's just becoming such a. It's becoming more. It's big. You got kids doing it. You got young adults doing it, and you got people like us doing it. And you know, it makes you wonder. I mean, these are the things that are eventually going to be coming to full tuition, and it's just going to be a compromise for everybody, because you've been mentioned. It's not just Dogman though, as you said too. You know, you have other people in different communities, like the ASMR community. I know a lot of people of that, as well as also people who just do this for, like, you know, go and explore certain topics that are non-political but are in the same realm, and they lose their monetization due to it. I mean, and you would, I mean, personally for you, you know, branching out would be the best way to go about it. Would you consider YouTube to be at all a platform to start doing stuff like this, or would you just consider to branch out, even if it was to make a website?
Well, if I was starting from scratch, I would do all platforms at the same time. Um, like if I was new and just getting going, I would build all platforms out at the same time, because the only difference is just uploading content, the same content, to a different platform. So, for example, this interview that you did with me, this interview can be uploaded to YouTube and get uploaded to whatever the freaking podcast platform is. It can be uploaded to Vimeo. It can be uploaded to your website. It can be uploaded everywhere. Um, and that's the way you get around it, because now you're building audiences on different platforms. So you're not pigeonholed to one platform. And so when the demonetization hits, and it really hits hard, then you're not beholding to what happens on YouTube. And essentially what YouTube is, they do is, it's like, you know, holding a carrot in front of a donkey. You know, we're going to hold this carrot in front of you for you to go this direction. If you don't go in that direction, we're going to remove that carrot. And so it's kind of corrective behavior based on the monetization. So if you don't say this, if you say this, we're going to take your monetization. Oh, we'll give it back to you in 3 months. Oh, you did it again. We'll give it back to you. And then eventually the person corrects whatever behavior that they want to be corrected, right? Unfortunately for me, my style and who I am can't really be corrected. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to be who I'm going to be. So and that's why it didn't work for me. And that's why my friends contact me. Is like, yo, dog, I know you, the stuff coming down the pipeline, bro, you're not going to do it. You know, you're a Christian. You're going to pray. You're going to curse. You're going to scream. You're going to smoke cigars. You're going to talk about anything you want to talk about, bro. You got to get your stuff together and do your own thing, in order for you to be able to function and not lose the audience that you built, and continue to grow. And I put that out there specifically because I want people to understand what's coming their way. Because I know people don't have that kind of inside information, but they've seen it play out. They've seen it play out like right in front of them, but they don't know what's going on. It's like watching, you know, a game show in German, and you don't speak German, and you kind of see the moves being made on TV, but you don't really understand what's happening. You don't understand what people are saying. And that's what's going on to a lot of the creators. And I've watched a number of great creators just disappear. And they were smaller channels that were phenomenal. They disappeared. They didn't have the opportunity to grow. And unfortunately, you know, sharing audiences is something that across the board in communities, people don't understand. That I know that a portion of my audience is your audience. So for me to promote you and push you doesn't hurt me, because they already know who the hell you are, and specifically when it comes to this topic, because they're consuming content on that topic. But everybody doesn't get that point, because they believe that, oh, this is my audience. These are my people. They worship me. They're mine. They all have their little fiefdoms and they're their little kings on their little castles. But they don't understand. People don't just consume your content; they consume everybody's content because they have an insatiable need to get that content. Specific. With that being said, I would like to touch back on the Dogman topic, that insatiable need to consume the content, and what I alluded to earlier, which was the people who seem to have a certain form of obsession with the topic. You know, out of all the paranormal things that I discuss, this particular topic is the only one where people have this really, really insane urge to consume as much of it as possible. That does two things. Number one, it what's the word I'm looking for? It not liquidate, it waters down the topic as a whole because people are not discriminating what they're listening to. So if somebody can pop up a Dogman channel on Friday and put out a story and get 5,000, 10,000 views, right? And someone else can, like you can be doing it for a year, doing interviews, and they get the same type of views you get. No background, no verification of who they are, no actual nothing to them. It's just a channel just popped up out of the blue because people are consuming the content like they're crazy. Then it waters down the whole thing. Unfortunately, that's what happens because people are just consuming. They're not discriminating about what they're consuming and trying to find the best of the best of the best. That poses a problem. But also, the next thing that you run into that can be a problem, what I've discovered is on this particular topic, and maybe you can help me with this because I've been trying to figure out why it seems as if this particular topic, there's almost a spiritual worship element of Dogman. Have you noticed how the fanatic nature of it is almost a form of worship? Have you experienced that?
Oh yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. I'm not going to get in any details with anybody necessarily. No one in relevance to anyone we know, but more along the lines of people I've spoke to in the groups, and there has been that type of situation where I've noticed, and
Well, let me clear that up. I'm not specifically talking about anyone in person in particular. If I was to, you guys, you know me, if I'm going to talk about somebody, I'm going to say their name. This is not targeted at anyone in particular. I'm talking about as a whole, the topic. It's almost as if it's a form of worship. And I believe that that goes back to what I was telling you about. Well, what I don't know if I went super deep into it. I believe that that's what goes back to part of the spiritual element of it. Remember, I said early in the interview, the people who have those manifestations in their bedrooms tend to be the people who consume that content, right? So, um, there is that element to where there's this obsessive, uh, compulsive nature to people wanting to consume the content. And I just want to let people know that you shouldn't chase after this thing like that. You know what I'm saying? Like there's in my opinion, there's a couple of type of people. There's people who don't believe in Dogman. You could tell them, hey man, I saw a 10-foot walking werewolf in the woods. And like, get the hell out of here, you're lying, right? There's people who've had a Dogman encounter and they're seeking answers, right? Those are the people that you and I talk to. And then there's people who like to consume Dogman content. They don't want to see Dogman, right? And you'll see that over and over. I don't want to see him, but I like hearing the stories, right? And those people are cool. They're not tripping. Then you go to the next group, which is I haven't seen him. I don't want to see him, but I want to hear everything that there is to say. I want to listen to every video, every story. Those are the people that get into the trouble where things start manifesting in their lives. So much so to where they start even having bad luck in their lives. And I think that goes back to something that I was talking about on Facebook. I said, what happens to the spirit of a dog man when it's killed? What happens to the spirit of any genetically modified entity, which is not really human, but created and fabricated? What happens to this its spirit or soul when it's killed? Um, Biblically, we know that um, the demons, a lot of the demons, were the spirits of the dead giants and Nephilim and Raphalim. Well, if these things actually fall into the same nature. They actually fall into the same category as genetically modified, whether it be by aliens or whether it be by angels or whether it be by people in the lab. What happens to that spirit when it dies? And I think that's what some people are tapping into, and manifesting and bringing towards them. And I just want to warn people to be extremely, extremely careful. Um, Use discretion as you consume, because you don't want to invite something into your life. It's entertainment, and it should be entertainment for you, or it should be educational research. But once you cross the Rubicon and start inviting it into your everyday life, we attract things, and you're going to get what you're looking for. You're going to find what you're looking for. You may not find it flesh and blood while you're walking around in the woods, but it's going to be attracted to you. And I just want people to be extremely careful.
And I have to agree with that. I mean, I understand now. I know what you meant. At first, I don't understand why I got totally dragged off in the sense of the worship aspect, but I understand totally what you mean by it because I've seen that. And I will admit, for someone such as myself, when I was starting out getting into all this, that was basically my interest of peak, listening to the stories, listening to what people have to put out there and present. And then when we transition into almost like it becomes like an obsession, it's like it's in the tale of like the Halloween mythos, of the Loomis character being so obsessed with the Michael Myers character. You get so obsessed into it, and it's almost like you religiously you get into it. And I think like you even said, going back into the whole idea of like you go into it. You get obsessed with it, you come out of it, and then it's like it's locked into you, and you put yourself on a pedestal for danger. And the scary part is that I don't think there's enough protection discussion that's been brought to the table to help people out in these situations. I mean, personally, you're
Sleeping dogs lie. So that, were you able to hear the last thing I said?
yes, I did. But I also
I wasn't alluding to anybody in particular. Like I said, I've been told in prayer to let sleeping dogs lie. So that wasn't taking a shot at anyone. The point I was making, and now you broke up when you were saying the last thing you said. So if you can repeat that, just repeat the very
Oh no, no,
last
no!
thing
I
you
was
were
just
talking
gonna
about.
right. I was just verifying though. I also didn't mean to put it in that context in terms of what you had said originally, because again, for me, I mean, that's not who I am. I know that's not who you are. That's just me. I was me misinterpreting what you had said. That's all I was just saying. But I was also saying,
Oh, okay. No. I didn't take it that way. I didn't take it any kind of way.
oh, no problem. You know what it is? It's just an understanding of basic of the beauty, and even on live streaming right now, everyone knows. But I mean, um, I think too, when people when you get into such a heavy topic like this, and it does become obsessive, and when it becomes obsessive, it becomes something that we really, as one would say, when there's such a huge energy with the discussion of Dogman, especially, and then how it is. It grows, it lingers, it could be worse. It leads to so many people. I've heard people who, they hear about it. I don't know.
We're moving into a time period. What'd you say? No, I was saying we're moving in a time period where a lot of things are manifesting that people are going to need answers to moving forward. We're seeing things happen, around the planet and around the world, that really are getting to the point to where we're getting into the realm of the unexplained. And I see more new people coming to me saying, "Hey, what is this? What is this I saw? What was this little small shadow that I saw coming, darting out of my bathroom, going down the hallway into my child's room? Why is my dog scared to go into the woods? What's this? What's that?" And I think we're at a point now where the community as a whole, the paranormal community as a whole, is going to be extremely important for the overall, 99.98% of the world to have a greater understanding of things that are transpiring right now. Because you have to understand, there's not a huge portion of the population that's active in the paranormal. There's a huge portion that believes, but they don't actively pursue the paranormal. That be whether it be Bigfoot, Dogman, whatever the hell it is. They believe, but they don't actively pursue it. And what you're seeing is, because of some of the revelations and things that are going on, and what I believe to be some of the veils that's being not even lifted but being torn down, people are starting to look for answers in places that they won't readily look for. I believe that it's going to be our duty moving forward to position ourselves to where not only we have answers for people, but we have enough people to actually give people answers and to help people have greater understanding. Um, Specifically, we got UFO disclosure going on left and right. For the first time ever in my life, I see, UFOs on the news pretty much every freaking day, right? Or you open a Drudge Report and they're talking about cigar-shaped UFOs spotted over Atlanta, or naval intelligence releases videos of UFOs. Um, so I think that now more than ever, it's important that we as a whole magnify as many voices as we can to be there with knowledge to answer questions for people, because I believe there are things coming down the pipeline that the average person is just not prepared for. Their mind, the context of their mind is not ready to digest what things that they're going to see. It's easy for a person who believes in Dogman to believe that there's some kind of alien. I mean, it's extremely easy. You believe in Dogman, you believe in Bigfoot. It's not a large leap to get to a gray-eyed alien, or a gray alien with big black eyes. It's not a huge leap. But for a person who's their only experience with the paranormal was deja vu, that's a huge leap to move from, oh, I experienced deja vu, to, holy crap, giants were real and people are seeing them in the woods. Really? Come on. It's a huge leap. So I think as a whole, we need to be prepared to help people garnish understanding, and more importantly, to tell them how to defend themselves.
That's a good way of putting it as well, too, and the way you go about an explanation wise, especially. And I think those are important perks that I think many would need to take into consideration in the field of practice that we do and study, especially to those who are brand new to it. Not the transition in between the cryptid and paranormal talk, but I want to talk a little bit about the paranormal, because I know that paranormal is a big, heavy hitter. And personally, I mean, I've had a few fair share of encounters there and there of small poltergeists and what appeared to have been some very odd um, activity within a certain location of a reported hotspot of reported ultra cult like activity. For you and paranormal, though, because you have a bit of a backstory with it, as you said, when we talk to you early in the beginning of the show, of where it all started with you. Um, Paranormal. I mean, would you say everything you said in reference to cryptid would be in the same perk and asset you'd go with paranormal, or is paranormal a little bit more deeper in discussion, parallel comparison to that of cryptid discussion?
I think it's a little bit more of a deeper discussion, mainly because when you started getting into paranormal, and for me, I classify cryptids and everything else under paranormal. So when I say the word paranormal, I'm concluding ghosts, demons, giants, sprites, freaking unicorns, Bigfoot, Dogman. Um, Everything is under paranormal for me. But specifically, what I mean by it, when we start talking about spiritual attacks that people have been through, from demonic stuff to poltergeist activity, which one of the things I try to do my best is to relay information to people and communicate effectively. You literally have to kind of dumb things down and chunk up just a little. So forgive me for the wide net that I cast with the word paranormal, but for the average person who's outside of it, everything is paranormal, right? Everything is freaky and paranormal. So, but to specifically get to what you're talking about, when we start talking about ghosts, demons, poltergeist activity, well, there's a number of reasons for those things. We start with ghosts and the ghostly encounters that I've had with people. Those encounters are not only have I talked to people who were haunted, I've talked to people who lived in places that were haunted. And once they moved out of the place, then they no longer had that haunting. And the next family moved in and the place was haunted. I've talked to people who've had family curses where no matter what they did, and I think I may have, people who've been listening to me a long time remember the story. Spoke to a young lady whose family had a bloodline curse that was ancient troll magic that came from Scotland, and it followed their bloodline. And no matter what her family did, they could never get, they could never have anything positive happen. They buy a new car, the engine would go out. They move into a new house, the house would catch on fire. I mean, just their family was plagued by paranormal things that were negative that were happening to them. That's actually counseling that woman without a strong hedge of protection, which I understand now, and will remind me to talk about how to protect yourself, because I think that's important. Counseling that woman without a strong hedge of protection is what led to me having the stomach problems that I kind of still have to this day, with extreme acid reflux, ulcers, all kinds of things. Again, and that goes to show you, when you deal with the real paranormal, there are always consequences for your actions. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. I had to learn that the hard way. But it led me to being the man that I am today, and I'm thankful for each and every encounter. So, when you start going into paranormal, getting the ghosts, getting the demons, getting into all those other things, if we're trying to address the origins of it, I do believe that everything still comes from the ultimate source of power. And I believe that that source of power created other sources, and that those other sources have dominion over certain areas and certain things. Um, if you get into ghosts and you're talking about, people getting the ghosts and talk about, well, ghosts are just spirits and those spirits haven't moved on and blah, 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 blah. I think a lot of there is some ghost activity, and then there's activity that pretends to be ghosts. And from there, you get into poltergeist activity. When you get into demonic activity, the way to understand true demonic activity is true demonic activity hinges on the opposite of everything that's good. So, for example, when I was having true demonic activity on Robert Street, there were things that were happening that let me know it was true demonic activity. For example, I use 7-day novena candles in my house all the time. At that point in time, I did. While I was working to get my hedge of protection extremely strong, I used 7-day novena candles. And that night, where I had this gigantic shadow creature come out of my son's bedroom and walk down the hallway, those candles, the flames started to lift off the wicks of the candle. So when you're having real demonic activity, things that normally happen in gravity reverse themselves, and they start to do the opposite, which is why when you look at movies and you see in the movie, like, oh, the crucifix was upside down, people's like, they don't understand the significance of the upside down crucifix. It's because it's anti everything. Demonic entities are anti God. So that's why your crucifix is turned upside down. That's why people who have real demonic encounters will tell you about water rising up out of the faucet or rising up out of the bathtub. They'll talk about flames where fire actually lifts off the wickets, which I encountered. That's where the people describe the intense coldness from, right? Oh, I had this cold chill. That's one thing. But intense coldness where you see like, and you see fog, that's the opposite taking place. And so people need to kind of understand, have the knowledge of what they're dealing with. So for example, ghost, demonic, right? Dealing with a ghost, come in the bedroom, I see something standing in a corner, it flickers, it moves around, it goes away. It does it over and over again. There may be, something may move here or there in the house. You're probably dealing with a ghost, right? When you start seeing things that go against the way that gravity is designed by God to work, and things start working in the opposite nature, now you're truly getting into the demonic. And I've told people over and over again, I think the most significant thing about the paranormal encounters for people who have them, who are searching for answers, is that certain people are allowed to see things that are paranormal, and they search for answers like, what was this I saw? Why did I see it? I've seen so much now and encountered so much now that I've gotten to the point to where I understand I was allowed to see that, allowed for it to affect me, only to verify that God is real, that he exists, and that he's there. If you're shown the darkness and you're allowed to walk into the darkness and survive it, where something comes in your house, walks around in your house while you hear whispering, like pss, 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 names being called, all kind of stuff. Um, and flames are lifting off the wicks. The water actually turned on in the bathroom. I didn't even bother to go in there to look because I already knew it was demonic. And I figured, there was water on the floor by the time it was all over. So I'm pretty sure that the water turned on in the faucet and was coming up out of the faucet. When you're allowed to see that kind of stuff, Chris, there only can be one reason why you're allowed to see it. You definitely don't want to embrace it, do you? No. Um, it's allowed for you. You're allowed to see that evil so it can bring you closer to God. And I think at the end of the day, if people look at their paranormal encounters in that way, then they will receive what's meant for them to receive. Then they get into how to protect yourself and how to create your hedge through prayer and through fasting. And now you start to protect yourself and protect your family. Things that people knew in the old days, things that prior to modern day technology, where people were in tune and paid more attention to their environment, and these things were more present, they understood how to protect themselves and protect their families. We've lost that these days because we're so seduced by trivial things. We're seduced by that latest YouTube video, that latest notification. We're seduced by everything that's going on in the news and having a new car and paying this bill and doing that. So our hedges are gone. And you see it manifesting in people's lives everywhere, through sickness, through divorce, through this, through that. And I believe that for us in the paranormal, those people who really understand what it is and why you experience it, it's only there to draw you closer to God. And from my experience, getting closer to God has not only allowed me to have a greater understanding of the paranormal, but it's allowed me to realize that it's not my battle to fight it either. So when something happens, I'm no longer afraid. When things manifest and do crazy stuff, I'm like, oh, you around here acting a fool. I'm going to go to sleep and somebody else going to deal with you. And so it removes that fear, and it actually empowers you, because now you have a certain level of peace. And as you know, Chris, when you talk to people who've experienced paranormal encounters, even yourself, I can promise you, when you had poltergeist activity happening, the one thing that you didn't have was peace, right? Oh, what happened? I'm not hearing you. All right, say that one more time. I'm sorry.
Um, yeah, peace. Peace was literally the first, literally one of the bigger things at the time was peace.
Right. And that's what it's designed for. They're designed to disrupt your peace and not allow you to have peace. And once peace is gone out of your life, everything else falls apart. There's no way to there's no way to focus. Families fall apart. Loved ones slip away from each other. Your finances fall apart. Um, Peace and safety are the two foundations of allowing you to function as a human being. And once that's disrupted, now you have problems. Now everything starts to fall apart. And so the people listening, your paranormal encounters, the things that you're seeing, the things that you're experiencing are only there to show you that evil exists. But the existence of evil automatically validates the existence of good. And then you have a choice that you're presented with. You're presented with the choice as to, are you going to continue to follow and chase after looking at evil? Or are you going to go and use that instant validation, which most people don't get it, Chris? Most people walk around life saying, oh, I wonder if God is real. Oh, I wonder if God loves me. Man, my life is going to crap. There can't possibly be a God. This can't be. Most people go through life like that. Or they go through life with blinders on, going through random little rituals. I go to church every Sunday, but I cheat on my wife. Or I go to church every Sunday, and I only go to the strip club once a week, right? Um, us in the paranormal world, we have a gift. We have one of the greatest gifts that you could ever get. And that gift is we have instant validation, 100% validation that evil is real. I have 1000% validation. 2706 Robert Street, New Orleans, Louisiana. Look it up on the map. Look it up on Google Maps, and you'll see the porch that I used to do all my interviews on. One night, Chris, I am sitting on the porch at 3 o'clock in the morning smoking a cigar because I couldn't sleep. Up walks a guy walking down the street, probably 25 years old, white guy, walks to the base of the steps, and it's dark up there. You can't see me. Maybe he could have saw the smoke. You know how your cigar is lit and you see the fire on the cigar. Guy looks up at me and says, James, I see you. I look down, this dude has black eyeballs. I can see his black eyes because the floodlights are on him. James, I see you. I don't like what you're doing. We don't like what you're doing, and God won't protect you. I'm like, wow. Dude, I'm sitting there and I say, wow. And this is exactly how I react, Chris. I say, wow, bro, you went through all this trouble to scare me, and I'm not scared. You know, what are you doing? Oh, you will be scared. I promise you, you'll be scared when we're done with you. Okay, get to doing what you're gonna do, right? Walks off, gone about his business. Dude, so much crazy stuff has happened to me that I know that evil exists. I know that it's real. I know that there are I've had massive psychic freaking attacks from people massively, wishing ill will on me, all that stuff. But the beauty of it all is, and I think when we get to the core of paranormal, Dogfoot, Bigfoot, ghosts, aliens, demons, giants, serpent beings, when you get to the core of it all, it's just good versus evil. And those of us who actually have validation of evil have instant validation of good. And that is the greatest gift. That's when you really boil it down to it. That's the mission we're on. And most people don't understand it. They get caught up in the entities. They don't understand that you're actually doing a phenomenal service for people if you tie it in the right way, because very few people have those encounters. Think about it. Ed and Lorraine Warren, right? Some of the most popular freaking researchers on the planet, documented demonic activity all over the place. When you go back and look at what Ed and Lorraine Warren actually were, they were exorcists, right? But that's not what's highlighted. It's the demonic entities that Ed and Lorraine Warren saw. That's what's highlighted, right? But they were exorcists. What is the exorcist? Person that exorcises demons in the name of Christ. So it's like intentionally, it's like someone severed that cord. Like, okay, I'm going to clip this cord and we're going to talk about all these demons and all these ghosts and all these blah, blah, blah. But wait, what about the back end of the cord? What about what it's really about? And that's, after being involved in this and experiencing everything I experienced from a kid to having family members that are still to this day involved in hoodoo. And these people ain't no joke, man. Some of my people will put something on you that, Lord Jesus, you're going to need every angel in heaven to get off of you. But to this day, that's what I've been able to come up with. And that's what's shown itself to me is God is with us through all of this. And all he wants us to do is acknowledge him, and all the peace and all the safety and everything else and all the worry, all that's lifted immediately. And everybody that I've spoken to, once they came to the conclusion and understood that and turned, all the rest of that foolishness stops, from Dogman to Bigfoot to people who were saying they was seeing aliens by their bed, like at the snap of a finger, gone. Not even worried about it. One chick in particular, she would still see great freaking aliens. And guess what? She told me, James, it's like they're there and they want to do me something, but they can't. And that goes into your hedge of protection that each of us have. But unless you compromise it, and you compromise that hedge by pursuing these things in a fanatical sense, unless you compromise it, you're extremely well protected. And then when you pray, you supercharge your hedge. And so on my website, iamdarkwaters.com, you can go to the front page and it has a thing that says, do you feel like you're haunted? Click here for haunting help. That'll take you to the prayers that you can use. You can literally pray the Psalms of the Bible. Just start reading 1 through 150, any one of them. And if you wanted to, and you really want to protect yourself and your family, read one a day. Read Psalms 1 on Monday, Psalms 2 on Tuesday, and just read them for 30 days in a row. And you will see the protection that surrounds you that is unlike anything you've ever seen. I mean, literally unlike anything you've ever seen. And you'll never see it unless you do it. You know what I'm saying? And you have a hedge, but trust me, you want to supercharge that hedge. And I know I've been talking, so I'm gonna shut up and kind of let you talk a little bit. I'm sorry.
No need to apologize, Dark. It's always great hearing what your perspective is on this because I think I think this is the first time I think a lot of people in a long time have officially kind of sat down try to get an idea on all this, especially to those who are not in the sake of religious value, but also at the same time people who are quite not understanding why these things happen to people. And when you think about it, and it makes a lot of sense, whether the turmoil in your life, and then you get the opportunity to go into the darkness, and then come out of the darkness, and you have the option of choosing of what path you choose. But I also think, in the sake being, whether in terms of religion or in terms of those who don't believe in religion, the cause and effect of why these things happen. There's a reason why, and as you mentioned, in terms of whatever the case is, there's always that type of atmosphere that one will possess. One will have positive thoughts, one will have negative thoughts. Bottom line is, if someone is doing something that, in the oath, of course, would be a negative on the act with the watch of God, right? You have people who, of course, do things, and I've interviewed people who have admitted to me things that they've done in their time, and I've asked, well, could that be a reason why you've had the activity, whether it's been cryptid or paranormal, just in general, from what I've seen. I ask, and it's crazy to get that reaction because it's like, well, I would have never imagined that would happen to me, but it does because there are things, and I think, as you said, that goes back to the old saying, God's watching you, God knows what you're doing, and I think it's not stressed out a lot because I think there's not a lot of people that do believe. And then when people don't believe, then it becomes a heavy hitter for those who have difficulty trying to get an understanding of what this stuff is. And I call it like it is, like on that part, because for those out there that don't know, and for those out there, some people don't quite get it. And I think it takes a matter of listening in to what those who studied it for the longest time have to say and get the idea. And
I agree with you, but at the same time, here's the beauty of it. Because I've spoken to people who've called me and be like, "Hey, Dark Waters, I don't believe in what you believe in, blah blah blah." I mean, I've had knockdown, drag out conversations with people. Well, I don't believe in what you believe in. Da da da. I said, "Well, are you plagued by something right now?" Yes. Okay. Are you tired of being plagued by that which is plaguing you? Yes. What have you tried? And they'll go into, I've tried to burn sage. I tried to do this. I tried to do that. I tried to do this. I tried to do that. Great. Awesome. I'm not telling you to believe what I believe. I'm simply telling you to give this a try. And you call me back and let me know what happened. You know what I'm saying? And so, okay, that'll be the agreement. I'll give it a try. Call back. Hey man, I just wanted to tell you, I tried what you said and it worked. Oh, really? And you don't believe? No, I still don't believe, but it worked. There are, Chris, there are witches and warlocks. When I tell you I do every interview there is, I've done every interview there is. There are witches and warlocks who will tell you what I'm saying right now is true. That practice dark, powerful, blood sigil magic, who will tell you, hey man, when I do something wrong and something bad comes, I call on Jesus and it goes away. That doesn't mean that they're going to be a follower of Jesus. They just know that there's power in that. And so they call upon it because they know there's power. So I'm number one, I'm not here to judge anybody's beliefs. That's not where I stand. And I think a lot of the problem comes in is that a lot of people, the problems come in because of the judgment. People want to judge somebody else. I can tell you right now, I am a walking terror 90% of the time. I am not the dude you want to be on the other side of the fence from. And I'm a work in progress. But what I can tell you is that this is what works, and this is what I've discovered, and this is what I believe, and this is what I know to work. And this is based on every paranormal thing that has happened to me. And when I tell you, Chris, it's happened the way I'm driving in a car and there is something, a black shadow in my back seat of my car. When I look through the mirror, every freaking paranormal encounter that I've had, this has worked. And it's worked when I wasn't 100% on board and believing like I am now. And it works 10,000 times better now that I'm 100% on board. So I think at the end of the day, when people get into the problem comes into where people get into the conversations of your religion versus my religion, you're this versus that, this versus that. I don't even care to hold that conversation. I'm telling you what I know to be true. and what people I know who practice dark magic know to be true. So if the people who summon demons know the way to get rid of a demon to call Jesus' name, and I'm telling you that you have both far-reaching ends of the spectrum to tell you that something works. And you can go, if you don't believe me, God made Google, go look it up on Google and check it out and see what, what Wiccans and dark magic practitioners use to get rid of the bad stuff. And they will tell you. They will admit it to you. They will tell you in a heartbeat. And it's so crazy because majority of the people that I've interviewed with that were into dark magic now are saying, nah, I'm leaving that alone. They're like, no, because they've seen the darkness. People are trying to put spells on them to actually kill them. They've seen the darkness and they've called upon the light in order to save them. And once you've truly seen the darkness and you've really been in it, then you really don't have an option. Like if you dabble in just a little bit, the lights flicker, okay, you can sit there and say, well, yeah, I don't believe. When the lights go off and the power's out in the neighborhood and the power's out in the city and it's just, it's you and that, trust me, they will come to it. I just hope that it doesn't have to happen like that for people to see what it is, but it can and it will, depending on what you're meant to do, and I just had a conversation with a gentleman today. He talked about all his Bigfoot encounters, Dogman encounters, poltergeist activity encounters, great, intelligent, phenomenally smart guy. And he said, man, I just don't understand why I experience it. And by the time we ended the conversation, he was like, bro, you know what? You're right. You're 100% right. I'm being shown this. And I'm like, yeah, you're being shown it. Because none of it ever hurt him. But it was always there. But it never hurt him. And the few people that I talked to been hurt, they were nowhere near hurt as bad as they could have been. So that's where I stand on it. And I think that people should explore it. And I wouldn't be doing my duty if I didn't explain that to people. So I want to make sure I explain that to people, because at the end of the day, I'll be judged for what the hell I say. And you won't be able to say that I didn't tell you. You won't be able to point your finger at me. Well, I listened to this guy for years. He never told me anything. Now I told you. It's on you what you do,
That's right. We're humans. We make our own decisions. It's up to us to make the efforts to do whatever we wish to do and understand. That too, I mean, would you say that what you said, in a way, would that be the best advice you want to throw to somebody in terms of protection when you go up against these things? Or is there another view or insight on protection that you would like to share that we haven't discussed yet?
It's so weird, bro, that every time it pauses out when you ask a question like that. I'm going to keep talking, assume that it'll get through. As far as protection is concerned, I believe that prayer is the best thing. I believe that fortifying yourself with prayer over and over is the most powerful thing. I give you guys a secret that I use when you're praying. Each of us are designated guardian angels. And you designated those guardian angels as a child. If you don't believe me, you go back and you can go out through history and look at, children talking about their guardian angels and people that have encounters talking about their guardian angels. Well, most people don't pray for their guardian angels. They just pray that, God will protect them. When you pray for yourself, pray for your family, pray for your bloodline, the forgiveness of your bloodline, of your sins of your bloodline, but also pray for those angels that God pretty much supercharges them, like puts them on steroids. I'll tell you a story, Chris, that I haven't told many people. I'm in the Metro PCS store about 2-3 months ago, and I'm leaning on the counter. I need to pay my cell phone bill. I think I had to pay about 12 o'clock, or like Metro PCS was going to turn it off. So it's like 11:49, right? And so I'm waiting. There's a long line, and there's this Latino family there with these two little girls. Toddlers, maybe 2-3 years old enough to walk around and kind of stumble around, but one of them was old enough to talk. So maybe one was 2 or 3, the other one was like 4 or 5, right? And I'm standing there leaning on the counter. The smallest one walks up next to me and starts petting the air, like she's moving her hand like she's petting a dog in the air, right? And she's just smiling, looking at the air, smiling and petting and smiling and petting. And I'm like, what the hell? Then the other one walks up, smiling and petting, and then she starts staring up into the air like imagine a kid looking straight up, like they're looking up at the ceiling, smiling. And so they walk back over to their mom because she's like, come over here, leave him alone. Come over here, leave him alone. And so the oldest girl says, I wanted to pet the lion. And the youngest little girl starts saying lion in Spanish. And then the oldest girl says, that's a big angel. It's a big angel. It's a very big angel. And so I'm like, what the hell? What the hell are they talking about? So the mom is like, stop it. Don't talk about that. And I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. What are they saying? And so the mom starts explaining to me everything my daughter is saying. And the oldest daughter is saying he has 2 lions and 2 big angels with him. And so I'm trying to get the mom to tell me everything. And she's like, well, sir, I don't see what she's talking about. But my daughter sees things all the time. And I believe her. And she says, you have 2 big angels with armor that are with you. And she's not saying armor, but she described to her mom like metal on the chest. And her mom starts talking to her in Spanish, which I don't talk a whole bunch of Spanish, but I talk enough to pick up on things. And so the mom says, yeah, she says, you have angels with armor. And that's how she described it. And then they pay their bill and they walk out and they leave, right? Well, prior to that, I started to pray for my guardian angels to be supercharged. Because I said, well, God, you grant power. I'll just grant them more power, grant them more and more power to make sure that whatever comes my way, they can deal with. And that's one of the biggest secrets that I'll share with people. It's not just pray once, it's pray every day. Number 2, pray for yourself, your family, your friends. Pray over people that you love and appreciate. And then pray for those that protect you, which are your angels and whatever else God is assigned to protect you. Pray for those things that they become stronger so that whatever comes your way, they can face it and fight it off. Now, Chris, prior to me being where I am today, where I'm interviewing with you in that 2706 Robert Street house, before I learned how to put up the hedge, stuff would pull on my feet and try and put me out of bed. Stuff would climb into bed with me. I would get what's called true night terrors, which a true night terror is you wake up and it feels like your spine is a guitar string chord, like somebody plucked a guitar string. You know how it goes bring and it vibrates? A true night terror is you wake up and it feels like everything inside of you is just shaking from the tip of your head to your feet, right? All those things. But it was me battling, understanding how to not only try and not to fight it myself, which I alluded to you guys earlier, but to allow God to fight it and then build the hedge. So now the hedge is so strong that every now and then, I mean, literally every now and then, I might feel like something weird is around. Like the very last time I felt something weird was around, I was working with one of the voodoo witches and something associated with her came to my house. Like it came and I was like, oh, I could feel you, but could you leave? Because, if you become a threat, that's going to be a problem. And whatever it was went away immediately. So, but if you build that hedge through prayer daily, not like, and I'm not talking about like, good bread, good meat, let's thank the Lord, let's eat type prayer. I'm talking about real prayer, then you will be perfectly fine. And that's what I want to leave people with. Because there are people experiencing real things, real encounters, real scary things, and that's what they need. And I'm not saying that from a judgmental standpoint, a judgmental perspective. That's what I'm telling you that I do. Some people worship whatever they worship or whoever they worship. If that works, if that higher power works for you, and you've had real encounters and it works, then I'm not the one to tell you to do anything different. But I'm telling you what works for me and works for people that I advise on them on how to deal with things.
That's some pretty good advice. I'm going to be honest with you. I think this is probably the first time in a very long time I've heard a lot of something like that, especially in terms of paranormal, be discussed like that. And I think that's something that I think needs to be stressed out more, especially and to those listening in. I think for those who have heard what Dark has had to say, please take it. You don't have to. Some will listen, some won't. But if you are faithful and you know what repercussions are, what this type of stuff we practice, what is the outcome of things, right? Follow it. And I always encourage everyone to follow that type of belief, especially because what we study, it's something that can be a great thing, it could be a bad thing. And I think Dark and I, especially Dark, covered a lot of it tonight in terms of our interview. But Dark, for 2 hours going strong, I'm going to be honest, speaking to you, I mean, it's like going to a lecture, and I can actually stay awake. Um, the best part about it too, I'd love to have you come back on the show, especially again down the road. It'd be very great to hear more from you. But before we do tune out the band, is there a couple of closing things you'd like to say? Any advice? Anything you'd like to showcase, promote, share? Especially, the floor is all you.
No, nothing at this point in time. I do have a couple of people working on short movies, so I hope you guys will enjoy those when they come out. I'll give a little bit more information about that when we get closer. Outside of that, if you want to check out all my content, is majority of my content is over at imdarkwaters.com. Now, on YouTube, I primarily use it as promotion platform, so you're getting half the stories and half the content. So if you really want the real deal content, head over to imdarkwaters.com and check it out and become a member. That's about it, buddy.
Well, hey, listen, Dark, it was great having you on the show. Definitely going to have you back on down the road. I want to thank you again for coming on. It was a pleasure listening to you and hearing your insight on the mysterious things that plague our world.
Nope. I appreciate you having me on, buddy. I'll talk to you again soon.
Absolutely. And ladies and gentlemen, with that being said, you're listening to the Venomous Fringe. You all have a fantastic evening. Take care now.